step with me into a Roman town in Britain, early in the 5th century. It is a good place to be alive. The streets are laid out in a grid, paved and drained. There is a forum where you buy and sell, a basilica where the law is kept, public baths where the whole town goes to wash and gossip in the heat. Water runs in lead pipes. The wine on your table came from Gaul, the fine red pottery from a workshop across the sea. The coins in your hand carry the face of an emperor 1,000 miles away. You are Roman. Not in the way the legions were Roman. You have never seen Rome, and you never will, but in every way that matters here. You speak Latin in the market. You worship in the Roman way, or the new Christian way the emperors have taken up. Your grandfather was Roman, and his grandfather back through 360 years, to the day the legions of Claudius waded ashore and made this island part of the greatest empire on earth. It has always been this way. It will always be this way. That is simply the shape of the world. Except, have you noticed how few soldiers there are now? The forts along the northern wall are quieter than they used to be. The last big detachment marched away years ago to fight for a man who wanted to be emperor, and they never came back. The raids are getting worse. You have heard the stories from the coast, the Saxon ships, the burning, and the coins. When did you last see a new coin? A fresh one, freshly struck. You cannot know it, standing here in your paved and orderly town. But you are living in the last years of Roman Britain, and when it ends, it will not end slowly. Within your lifetime, the coins will stop. The pottery will stop. The soldiers will not return. The roofs will fall in. And within 2 generations, your grandchildren will stand in the ruins of this very town, and they will no longer know how it was built. How does a civilization simply switch off? Not fall in battle. Not get conquered by a greater power. Just stop. The lights go out one by one, and nobody quite decides to turn them off. And then one day they are all dark and no one alive remembers how to light them again. That is what happened to Roman Britain. For 3.5 centuries, this island was a functioning piece of the Roman world, with cities, a money economy, mass-produced goods, writing, roads, running water. And then, in the space of a single generation in the early 5th century, almost all of it vanished. Not damaged. Not reduced. Gone. The towns emptied. The coins stopped. The potteries closed. People forgot how to build in stone. Britain did not just leave the Roman Empire. It fell out of the ancient world entirely, faster and more completely than any other Roman province. Gaul stayed half Roman. Spain stayed half Roman. Britain went dark. And here is the strangest part. The famous date, 410, the year the Romans left Britain, the date in every textbook, may rest on a single sentence that a scribe, somewhere, copied down wrong. This is the story of how the light went out on Roman Britain, and of how little we actually understand about the moment it happened. If you want the real story of how civilizations end, not the tidy dates, but the slow, strange human truth underneath, subscribe and walk with us. This one is closer to home than most. To feel the weight of what was lost, you have to understand what Roman Britain actually was. This was not a rough frontier outpost. By the 4th century, Britain had been Roman for 300 years, and it was a mature, wealthy, deeply Romanized province. It had real cities, London, York, Colchester, Lincoln, Bath, with stone public buildings, temples, theatres, and the whole apparatus of Roman civic life. It had a countryside dotted with villas, grand country houses with mosaic floors, underfloor heating, bath suites, painted walls, the comfortable estates of a wealthy landowning class. It was bound together by the roads, thousands of miles of them, straight and engineered and paved, carrying trade and troops and imperial post from one end of the island to the other. And in the north, guarding the edge of the Roman world, stood the most famous frontier in the empire, Hadrian's Wall, 73 miles of stone from sea to sea, manned for nearly 3 centuries. And it ran on money. Roman Britain was a cash economy. Millions of coins circulated. People bought and sold with imperial currency, paid taxes in it, were paid wages in it. Ordinary people used mass-produced goods shipped in from across the empire, pottery, glass, metalwork, the products of an integrated economy that stretched from Britain to Syria. Everything about this world depended, in the end, on one thing, that Britain was part of something larger. The coins had value because the empire stood behind them. The trade flowed because the empire kept the seas and roads safe. The towns were full because the system that fed them worked. The soldiers held the wall because Rome paid them and sent them. Pull out that one foundation, the connection to the empire, and every single thing above it was in danger of coming down. In the last decades of the 4th century, that foundation began to be pulled out. Not by an enemy, by Britain's own ambitious men. Here is the tragedy at the heart of the end of Roman Britain. The island was not stripped of its defenders by a foreign enemy. It was stripped by its own soldiers chasing power somewhere else. It happened in stages, and each one bled the garrison a little more. The first great wound came in the year 383. A Roman commander in Britain named Maximus was proclaimed emperor by his troops, and to make his claim real, he needed an army. So he took one. He gathered a large part of the British garrison and crossed the Channel into Gaul to fight for the throne of the West. Many of those men never returned. Maximus's bid ended with his own death a few years later, but the soldiers he had led out of Britain were scattered across the continent, folded into other armies, dead in other men's battles. Britain had lost a chunk of its defence, and it did not get it back. Then came the killing blow. In the year 407 the story repeated, but worse. The army left in Britain raised up another usurper, another man they proclaimed emperor, Constantine III. And Constantine did exactly what Maximus had done on a larger scale. He took the mobile field army of Britain, the real fighting force, the troops that could actually defend the province, and he crossed into Gaul with them to press his claim on the empire. This time there was almost nothing left behind. Think about what this means. Twice in a generation, Britain's soldiers were led out of Britain to fight for men who wanted to be emperor, and twice they did not come back. The province was being drained of its defenders not by invasion but by ambition. Every usurper who rose in Britain took the army with him when he left, because the army was the only thing that could make him emperor, and the island paid the price. By 408, Roman Britain was a wealthy, undefended province sitting in a sea full of predators, and the predators had noticed. They came from 3 directions. From across the North Sea came the Saxons, seaborne raiders from the coasts of what is now Germany and Denmark, striking the eastern and southern shores of Britain in their long ships, burning, looting and slipping away before any response could gather. The Romans had built a whole chain of coastal forts to hold them off, the forts of the Saxon shore, but forts need soldiers, and the soldiers were gone. From the north, beyond the wall, came the Picts, the peoples of what is now Scotland, who had raided Roman Britain for generations, and who now found the frontier thinner than it had ever been. And from the west, across the Irish Sea, came the Scotti, raiders from Ireland, striking the western coasts. For a province with a full garrison, these were a manageable threat, painful but survivable. For a province whose army had just sailed away to Gaul, they were a catastrophe. The raids of 408 and 409 were severe. The coasts burned, and there was no field army left to drive the raiders back into the sea. So the Britons did something remarkable. Abandoned by the usurper who had taken their soldiers, under attack on every coast, they took matters into their own hands. According to our sources, the Britons expelled the Roman officials who still claimed to govern them in the name of Constantine III, and they organized their own defense. They broke, in effect, with the failing imperial regime that had bled them dry. And it is at this moment, with Britain defending itself, cut off from a collapsing empire, that the most famous document in the story appears, or seems to appear. A letter from the emperor that may not have been about Britain at all. The year is 410. It is a catastrophic year for Rome itself. This is the year Alaric's Goths sack the Eternal City, the first time Rome has fallen to a foreign enemy in 800 years. The Western Emperor, Honorius, is holed up in Ravenna, fighting for the survival of Italy, with no soldiers and no attention to spare for a distant island. And according to the tradition, in this year, the British communities sent a desperate appeal to Honorius: help us, send troops, save us from the raiders. And Honorius sent back a reply. A rescript. A short, cold, final answer. He told the cities of Britain to look to their own defences. That is it. That is the moment enshrined in every textbook as the end of Roman Britain. The emperor, unable to help, formally telling the Britons they were on their own. The official cutting of the cord. AD 410, the year the Romans left Britain. Except, and this is where the story becomes genuinely strange, that famous sentence may not be about Britain at all. The line comes to us from a Greek historian named Zosimus, writing about a century later. And here is the problem. The passage in which it appears is describing events in northern Italy. The sentence about the cities being told to defend themselves sits in the middle of a discussion of Italian affairs. And the word Zosimus uses, the place name, could be read as Britannia, Britain, or it could be a copyist's error for Bruttium, the region we now call Calabria, in the far south of Italy. Read it one way, and it is the single most important sentence in the history of Roman Britain, the emperor's final farewell to the island. Read it the other way, and it is a minor administrative note about a district in Italy, and it has nothing to do with Britain whatsoever. Historians have argued about this for a very long time, and there is no settled answer. Which means the most famous date in British history, 410, the year the Romans left, may rest on a misreading. A slip of a pen 1400 years ago that we turned into the end of an era. Sit with that for a moment. How much of the history we are certain about hangs on a single ambiguous line in a single late source? It is humbling. It is worth being humble about. If you value history that shows it's working, that tells you not just what happened but how shaky our knowing sometimes is, the membership link is in the description. It keeps this kind of careful work being made. Now, whatever the letter meant, what happened next is not in doubt. Because whether or not the emperor ever sent that letter, the reality it describes was true. Rome was not coming back. And what followed was one of the most complete collapses of a civilization anywhere in the ancient world. Watch the lights go out one by one. First, the money. Roman Britain ran on coin, and after around the year 409, no new coins arrived. The empire had stopped shipping fresh currency to a province it no longer controlled. For a while people kept using the old coins, clipping the silver ones to stretch the supply. But a cash economy cannot survive without cash. Within a generation, coins simply stopped being used across most of Britain. A society that had run on money for 400 years reverted to barter or to nothing. Then, the goods. Roman Britain had been full of mass-produced pottery, cheap, standardized, wheel-thrown vessels made in industrial quantities and shipped everywhere. It is so common that archaeologists use it to date sites to the year. And then, in the early 5th century, the pottery industry simply ends. The big workshops close. And here is the staggering part, the skill goes with them. After the collapse, Britain stopped making wheel-thrown pottery almost entirely. They go back to crude, handmade pots, the kind their ancestors had made before the Romans ever came. An entire technology forgotten. Then, the towns. Without trade, without money, without the administration that sustained them, the Roman cities empty out. The public buildings are abandoned. The baths go cold. Grass grows in the forums. People drift back to the land because the land at least still feeds you. And then the buildings themselves. This is perhaps the most haunting detail of all. The Britons stopped building in stone. The knowledge of how to construct a masonry building, a skill the province had possessed for centuries, was lost. When people built at all, they built in timber. The great Roman structures were left to stand and slowly fall, quarried for their stone by people who could no longer make such things themselves. Later generations would look at Roman ruins and assume they had been built by giants, because no ordinary man could raise walls like that. This is the thing that makes Britain different from the rest of the fallen West. In Gaul, in Spain, in Italy, Roman life bent and changed and continued. The city survived, the church kept Latin alive, the villa economy limped on. In Britain it did not bend. It broke. Within 2 generations of that letter, real or not, Roman Britain was not a struggling society. It was archaeology. The Britons did not give up easily. They fought to hold what they could. Around the year 446, a generation after the break with Rome, there is one last desperate cry for help. Our source calls it the groans of the Britons. The Romano-British leaders sent an appeal across the sea to the most powerful Roman general of the age, Aetius, the man holding the Western Empire together in Gaul. The message, as it comes down to us, is stark. The barbarians drive us to the sea drives us back to the barbarians. Between these two, we are either slaughtered or drowned. They begged for a legion, for help, for Rome to remember them. No help came. Aetius had a collapsing empire of his own to hold. He had nothing to send. The groans of the Britons went unanswered. Britain was on its own, for good. and into that undefended island came the Saxons, not just as raiders now, but as settlers. The tradition, and here we must be careful because our main sources are the monk Gildas, writing angry and vague a century later, and the historian Bede, writing 3 centuries later. The tradition says that the Britons, unable to defend themselves, made a fatal bargain. They hired Saxon warriors as mercenaries to fight off the Picts. And the Saxons, once inside, looked at this rich undefended land and decided to keep it. They sent for more. Under leaders the tradition names as Hengist and Horsa, figures who are half history and half legend, the trickle of Saxon settlers became a flood. We should be honest that the details of this, the names, the dates, the neat story of invitation and betrayal, are late and unreliable, more legend than record. The 5th century in Britain is one of the darkest holes in European history. We barely have any contemporary written source at all. But the broad outcome is not in doubt. Over the following centuries, the eastern and southern parts of the island became Anglo-Saxon. The language changed. The old Roman-British culture was pushed west into Wales and Cornwall, or absorbed or extinguished. Britannia, the Roman province, was becoming England, the land of the Angles. It was out of this dark, chaotic, half-remembered century, the Britons fighting a losing war against the incoming Saxons, that the greatest legend of all would eventually grow. The story of a last Romano-British war leader who held the line against the darkness. We know him as King Arthur. He is almost certainly a myth. But the desperation that created him was very, very real. We made something for the people who feel the weight of that lost world, the province that went dark. If you want to carry a piece of it, the link is in the description. Here is what stays with you. We imagine that civilizations end in fire, in a great battle, a sack, a screaming fall. And sometimes they do. But Roman Britain did not end that way. There was no final battle for the province, no last stand, no dramatic conquest. Rome did not lose Britain. Rome simply stopped paying attention. The soldiers were called away. The coins stopped coming. The letters went unanswered. And a whole world quietly came apart because the thing holding it together, the connection to something larger, was withdrawn, a little at a time, until one day it was gone and no one could say exactly when. That is the quiet horror of it. Britain was not defeated out of the empire. It was forgotten out of it. And notice how fast the fall was once it came. 360 years of Roman civilization, cities, money, industry, literacy, engineering, undone within a single lifetime. People who had been born into a world of coins and pottery and stone towns died in a world of barter and timber and ruins. The knowledge did not fade over centuries. It fell off a cliff. One generation had it, the next did not. This is the lesson Roman Britain leaves us 1600 years on. The comforts we think of as permanent, the running water, the money in the wall, the goods on the shelf, the roads, the order, none of it is natural. All of it rests on a vast, invisible system that has to be maintained, connected, and paid for. It feels eternal, right up until the moment the connection is quietly cut. And then it can go dark faster than anyone believes possible. The Romans in that paved and orderly town could not imagine their world ending. It had always been there. It always would be. And then, within their children's lives, the lights went out, and did not come back on for 600 years. Roman Britain ended in a slow, quiet fading. But it began in fire, with a rebellion that nearly strangled the province in its cradle, led by a queen who burned 3 Roman cities to the ground and slaughtered tens of thousands. Her name was Boudica. That story is next. Click it, and walk with us further